Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, the heart of South Africa, presented by Annie van Dinther and Richard de Gouveia. Richard has been guiding with NatHab across Africa since 2015, and Annie is NatHab's Guide Development Director, leading trips for us since 1999. It's great to have you both with us today. Annie, I'll hand things off to you.
Great, thank you so much, Kendall. Appreciate that introduction. And thank you to all of you who are signing on today to learn about this idea of the heart of a place, and specifically relative to South Africa. I'm really excited to have Richard as my special guest today. I cannot wait to learn about South Africa more. What's interesting to me about this particular topic is that if you were here last week when we talked about the heart of a place relative to Mexico, that's a place that I have been to many times. So Sophia helped me with that, and then I asked questions. As we sort of talked about then, there are different ways of knowing a place. There's living there, being local, as Richard is. Then there's maybe someone who works there seasonally, like I do in Baja. Then there's a tourist who's maybe been there one time or two times, something like that. And then there's, of course, having never been to a place and only ever understanding that place from an outside perspective or from someone else's perspective. And that's where I sit today, perhaps with some of you. I've never been to South Africa. I am 100% going off of sort of either stereotypes or preconceived notions, certainly some education and having learned from my coworkers. But I'm excited to travel there with you today. And I don't think we could have a better guide to lead us through this journey. So welcome, Richard. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get going.
Annie, thanks so much. Thanks for the great introduction. And I'm really looking forward to guiding you and all of the guests that are watching here with us through this incredible country. I love South Africa. I'm proudly South African, and it is an incredible country with many, many diverse things. So basically, let's dive into me very, very briefly. I did a guiding course after a crazy time in my life where I was working in the corporate world. I had the loss of my parents over my head, and I decided to chuck it all in and decided to take up exploration. Here you can see me diving through a mud pool, eating impala testicles and wildebeest testicles as our initiation into guiding, so a little bit crazy, but I've always had a sense for exploration. And going into the Blyder River Canyon, which is the third largest canyon in the world, which is just around the corner from where I am now, and into Namibia and all around. My guiding career is always been hands-on, and I just love the big cats. And I was very fortunate to also take part in a guiding competition, or for the Guide of the Year competition in 2013, which was an amazing experience. But effectively, guiding is life. And this was a reserve sabi that I spent a lot of time on, and I've recently just been back to spend a week during this lockdown and basically be the only one out there. So I love the bush, and I love being part of it and doing the things that make me happy. And I'll always go to the nth degree to make sure that the guests get the experience they need and the information they need. So I'm going to do that for you now. So please send questions through to Annie, and she will try and ask me as much as she can, and we'll be interacting with you guys the whole way through this webinar. So here was a situation where I actually showed guests how buffalo do their mud rolling and rhinos do mud rolling in a mud wallow. Needless to say, my tracker did not let me get back into the vehicle for fear that he would have to clean that part. So I had to sit on the tracker seat the rest of the way home. So that's basically my little introduction of me. I love NatHab. I've been guiding with NatHab for about 6 years now. I'm dying to get back into the field, and I'm really excited just to guide you guys and get a little bit of guiding back into me over the next hour.
Well, we're super excited to have you here, Richard. And I want to speak a little bit about a few things that are kind of different than what we normally do. First of all, we're using a new platform for you to communicate this information to us. And I'm so excited, as folks just saw, We can dip in and out of a topic in a different way. And that's one of the things that gave us the courage, quite frankly, today, to have you all asking questions as we go, because Richard can kind of bounce around in a different way than we normally have the capability of doing. Now, let's talk about why this question, the heart of a place. I realized after doing a presentation a few weeks back that one of the things that guests enjoyed was this idea of, I felt like I went there with you. And I think those of us who are passionate about travel, we're kind of travel deprived right now. I mean, not kind of, we're literally travel deprived. And I began to think about this idea of what makes a place, that particular place itself. Is it the food? Is it the culture? Is it the people? What is that thing, that je ne sais quoi about an area that you can only know until today, and we're going to do this, that you can only know via literally traveling to that location? Could we achieve that in this conversation? Let's try to bring our guests right there alongside. And so my first question for you is, can you just tell us a little bit of basics on South Africa? Where are we in the world?
So can you see my cursor moving around? Okay, yes, fantastic. So I'm based in Johannesburg, which is right in the middle here. And let's jump in here. So you'll see Johannesburg is right in the middle here. And in Johannesburg, it is basically the economic hub of South Africa. And it's an incredible city because it's one of the very few cities or most populated cities in the world that does not occur on a major river or on the ocean. It was built specifically around gold. Its Zulu name is Igoli, which means place of gold. And around the main city, you will actually see these big mine dumps, these yellow-orange mine dumps, where there is still gold within that people are recycling through it. So this entire place built up through that. And there's a huge amount of culture that has come into it. When Nelson Mandela left his prison, he went to Soweto, and you can do Soweto tours there. The Apartheid Museum is in there, and we'll talk a little bit more about apartheid in a little bit. And the food around South Africa is incredible. This is one of my favorite restaurants called Marble. And it just has the most spectacular view of a sunset and the most incredible food. So we're very lucky in terms of the life we live out here. And I've lived here my entire life. So Johannesburg is the central hub. The other place that most people know is Cape Town. And it is very unique to Southern or South Africa. But a lot of people around the world might not know anything about Pretoria or Durban or anything, but most people have heard about Cape Town. And obviously Table Mountain is one of those places that is iconic. You can see the city in the foreground there, and this is what we call the tablecloth coming over Table Mountain as I took this time lapse from a place called Bloberg, which is very famous for kiteboard surfing, for kite surfing. And it also is home to the most summited mountain in the world, which is called Lion's Head, that there's probably about 300 to 400 people summiting it daily to get up to the top. So it's a really cool place to visit and see a beautiful sunset. It also has the Cape Peninsula, which is the Atlantic Ocean, where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Indian Ocean, and it's a spectacular place to see wonderful floral things. We have a very unique floral kingdom there called the fynbos, and the fynbos is only found in the Western Cape of Southern Africa. It is a whole group of plants that cannot be found anywhere else on the planet, and it is littered with these things. And then we have the penguins, which a lot of people know about on Boulders Beach. But what's fascinating about these guys is they only arrived the year I was born, in 1982. They got drifted offline by bad currents, and then they set up a colony, and since then they've been living there. But the most important part about Cape Town is the wine. Wine farms are our staple. South Africa makes some incredible wines that rival the best wine farms in the world, and we even have our own grape varietal called Pinotage, which was a mix between the Pinot Noir and the Hermitage grape that was blended by a Dr. Gouveia. And this wine is very unique to South Africa. And if you come and visit, you have to try it out. So that's basically our rundown of the two major parts. And South Africa gets even more interesting because it is so diverse. The entire area over here around the Northern Cape is all desert. Around this area, around Springbok, in September, October, there is a massive floral bloom in the desert. It is incredible to witness. All the way along the coast, we have great arable land and big cities. In towards the middle here, a lot of farming. We have a mountain range that runs from Kruger National Park, and Kruger National Park is up at the top here, all the way down for 1,000 miles, all the way down to the Cape. So it's a very diverse area that is also home to other places. So just on our doorstep, we have Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, on the border of Zimbabwe and Zambia. We have the Okavango Delta in the north of Botswana, which is a very unique place to visit. And it also gives you some great sunsets. It's the only river that deltas into a desert, and a spectacular place to visit. And then Namibia is a crazy place where we have some of the best star viewing in the world. Oh, that's not starting.
Wow.
So
this is one of my favorites, you know that.
Yeah, I love the Star Trail. So this was actually taken on New Year's Eve. This was the first part of this year, and probably the happiest part of this year for a lot of people. But yeah, this Star Trail was taken over 5 hours that I recorded the stars moving.
Wow, it's absolutely gorgeous. So what I'm seeing in these places is you have access to some of the world's most incredible phenomena and a huge amount of diversity. Let's talk a little bit about some comparisons here, just so we can get an idea. Alaska is around 650, 700,000 square miles. Yep. What is the size of South Africa?
So South Africa is about 470,000 square miles with a population of about 60 million people.
Oh my goodness. So here in Alaska, we have our square miles and our population are close to 1 to 1. We have about a square mile for every person that lives here.
That's crazy.
Your country here is close to, I guess, a little more than half the size of this fine state, and you've got 60 million people. The United States alone is 300 million people in our entire country. So when we look at stereotypes of places, certainly population would be something that would come up for us when we're thinking about South Africa. And that leads me to these questions. We even have one here in the from one of the guests. How different was the bush without other guests? And before you answer that, I want to kind of add something to that. We talk about the bush here in Alaska, and I think it might be a little bit different. So could you first define the bush for us and how that term is used there, and then let us know what it was like with or without guests?
Cool. So the bush here for us, we refer to wilderness with animals, so nature reserves, Kruger National Park, things like that would be referred to as the bush. Anywhere that is a wilderness area with a lot of animals would be called the bush. Now that experience of being alone, and I'm going to put that video up again because I think it really has some punch to the idea of just being out there all on my lonesome. And it was the most surreal thing, because for the most part, on any given day, you got 10 to 12 vehicles out on that reserve with guests and everything. I went in there and they're keeping a bubble of keeping clean from COVID. So because I come from Johannesburg, I had to move to a separate point. I had my own cooking station, everything, so that there was no contact between me and them. And I was given a vehicle and I went out. Now, to be out on a place that I have called home for, I called home for 6 years. My wife still works there, works for them, and it was just magnificent. The silence, the solitude, just the time with things. And what was even more amazing, and I was worried about it, because you normally have 10 to 12 vehicles all in contact with one another, all telling each other what they found, you're now on your own. For the most part, I was on my own most of the time, which means that I had to find everything myself, which left me a little worried that I wasn't going to see stuff. But boy, did I see stuff. It was the most insane time. Leopards mating, leopards fighting, lions chasing things. I got chased by a rhino. It was all sorts of craziness.
Wow. So when you talk about the bush there, you're
Yes.
talking about actually an area that's quite involved with humans. I mean, if there's fences and there's sort of managed game, when you say the word wilderness, I think we might have different ideas about that. Here, if we have animals in a fence, that's, you know, not the bush. Even if that's a large area that they're fenced into. I'm curious about this term because I think vocabulary says a lot about a place. Do you use the word bushed when referring to someone who has maybe been out in the wilderness without human contact for a little bit too long? Is that a term you use?
Not at all. I haven't personally come across it. But the other thing is, Annie, with the idea of the fences, you may have fences around it, but like Kruger National Park, which again sits up in this top part of the country up here in the northeast, this is 5 million acres of fenced land. It's fenced around 5 million acres, and then it opens up into Zimbabwe and into Mozambique, which then adds on another 5 million acres. So your fenced areas, there are smaller fenced areas, but some of the bigger reserves, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres to millions of acres that are fenced.
So you don't have any idea when you're in that park that you're in a fenced area?
No, and that's one of the keys to guiding in these places, is also making sure that people don't feel like they ever see a fence. They must feel like they are in the wilds of Alaska, miles away from anything. But people don't get bushed here because the communities and everything are so close. So even in the Sabi Sands, where we visit with NatHab, you can actually see how the light pollution from the nearby villages that have grown into towns is now permeating up and even impacting the starlight and the night skies that we're seeing at night.
Wow. So we kind of have different ideas of this, but at the same time, when you're in those parks, you really do feel as if you are in the wilderness. And in some ways you are, because that's what's been protected, right? That's what's been set aside, it's intact wilderness.
Well, the fence has two parts. So the fence keeps the animals in so that people don't get hurt by the animals, because we have a lot of dangerous animals that roam around, and vitally keep poachers out.
Right. So that was going to be another question that we've got here from Susan. She says, I'm really worried about conservation efforts when one of the main sources, tourism, has been halted. Are you seeing problems in the bush with increased poaching or loss of community support during this time?
So I'm gonna jump in, because I'm actually gonna detour a little bit and talk about the history of the country, because I think it has such a huge part to play in the role that this will take down the line. So as you all possibly know, we had a horrible regime in power that was called apartheid, and apartheid means separation. So what the government did was actually separate people by race. On your ID card, you had written down, you were white, you were Asian, you were Indian, you were colored, you were black, and these were all kept as a way of distinguishing people. There were even tests to tell if you were black or not, like the pencil test. So if you put a pencil in a person's hair and it fell out, they were regarded as not black. So these crazy stupid things that happened, but it created these areas where black people lived in specific areas, white people lived in specific areas. And as time went on, obviously we had the falling or the crashing of apartheid, and it was incredible that we didn't have a civil war that came along with it. Everything was sort of on a nice edge at that point because there were so many tensions. But this beautiful man named Nelson Mandela came in and came out of jail after being in prison for as long as he was, with not a hate in his body. He just wanted to move forward and bind everyone together and move and grow things. And once these sanctions had been lifted because apartheid had crumbled, tourism became a huge industry. And tourism then drove a lot of things. So about 20% of our GDP comes from international tourism. So it's a huge part of our lives. And because of that, you have huge numbers of people. And this was me at Sabi Sabi when I went out on one of the community tours, because we actually offered a tour to go out into these communities and visit them, and go visit a witch doctor, and go to a shebeen, which is an off-license pub, and just interact with these people. And it's so much love and so much care, and the bonding that tourism has created and the job opportunities it's created is huge. Just one person within the tourism industry is probably supporting around 8 people at home. So now with the lockdown, no one's working, and we need to try and keep these areas going. And reserves, I know of a few reserves that have actually gone bankrupt. They can't keep themselves open, and that is definitely going to have a knock-on effect down the line. But fortunately, there still are some good anti-poaching preventions in place. We'll just have to see how they hold up in the long run.
Wow, it's amazing to me to learn about apartheid from you. How many generations now have you been in South Africa?
So on my mother's side, they've been here for about 300 years, so since a long time. And my father's side a bit shorter. But the integration, one of the biggest things about South Africa is its diversity. We have 12 different languages, 11 different official languages. Only 2 of them are Caucasian language. And we have the Bushmen that are there, and the Bushmen's click language isn't even one of those official languages. So what happened was these languages all evolved over time, and what is amazing is that Xhosas, which have a lot of clicks in their language, actually developed or altered the language because of trade with the Bushmen and their clicks, where the Zulus didn't have that interaction, so they didn't have as much. But what you will find in South Africa is there's a great diversity, and the people are what make this place so special. They are full of love and friendliness and happiness, and it's incredible to see how things have changed and moved forward, and how people have grown and grown together. But that trying to separate those lines that were blurred for so long, or try and meld them together, has become very difficult too, because you don't often forget. We look at the Black Lives Matter initiative or thing that's going on in the States. It goes all the way through to here, all over the world, and there's no more prevalent place than what went on here. So I think apartheid and what Nelson Mandela came out and did is such an important thing for the rest of the world to learn from.
So critically important. And it was, for me, honestly, it was my first awareness of sort of international human rights. I remember when I was in high school, long before I even really knew what being an expedition leader was, that was when the Coca-Cola boycott on Coca-Cola was happening. And my sort of sense of social justice was just, kind of coming about. And I remember joining and helping to run an Amnesty International group at my high school, like in Michigan, and that's how I think the issues that were happening in your country were spreading awareness across the entire globe. For me, that really was my first introduction to South Africa, was learning about that whole issue. I find here, when we're talking about human rights or civil rights, whatever it might be, I think we often feel like we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I imagine that's what you mean when you speak about the complexities of healing this kind of totally ingrained, systematic culture that is just not healthy for the country as a whole. So when we're talking about the heart of a place, this is one thing that we have to recognize when we understand South Africa. When we spoke about the heart of a place for Mexico, we did talk about some of the sort of stereotypes that Americans have regarding different things about Mexico. And of course, some of those have to do with tacos, some of those have to do with fabric, some of them have to do with just sort of these things that you see a picture of a piñata and you think Mexico, right? What to you, I see you've put up these pictures here of a shirt and a pair of shoes. Tell us a little bit about these and what these have to do with understanding the heart of South Africa.
So obviously within the cultural diversity, there's a lot of things that stand out as Africanisms, and I like to call them South Africanisms. But one of the big things that came through from the farming style of stuff are these shoes. The shoes are called vellies. Vel means skin in Afrikaans, and they were always made out of a hide of either an animal or like a cow or maybe an antelope or something like that. And they became these farming shoes, which are now very trendy. And what will never be trendy in the world is the two-tone khaki shirts that your farmers generally wear. So those are two real South Africanisms. Boerewors is a type of farmer's sausage, is a very South African thing. It's a very thick sausage that we put on our braai. You guys barbecue, we braai. We do it right. It's just the way it happens. And then we also have pap, which means soft, but it's a maize meal that's ground down into a fine powder and then made into a porridge. And you have it with your boerewors and a tomato onion relish or a gravy of some sorts, and that's very much a staple diet out here in South Africa.
Would that be something, if I came on a NatHab trip, would I eat that?
Yeah, for the most part, there would be at least one place that it would be organized, and if it wasn't, we'd make a plan to get it organized because it is such a unique flavor. Yeah, and it's dirt cheap to make, so it's not exactly like it's not everywhere to make it.
Okay, so in this shirt that you have here, is this the American equivalent of overalls?
Absolutely. So it's a working shirt, but if you do the top button up, then you're going to church. Then it's very formal. If you undo the top button, then it's working overalls.
Got it. And the shoes, you know, I'm not sure the name brand, but there's a pair of shoes from New Zealand that is sort of a little bit of a muck boot that is very hip and trendy in the States right now. And here in Alaska, we have the Extra Tough. This is a rain boot, sort of a muck boot. You can't make it through an Alaskan spring or fall without them because it's sort of breakup time and it's all muddy. I think we're seeing this, that the worker's shoe is becoming sort of hip and chic in other places. What's interesting is happening with the Philly. Am I saying it right?
Felly.
Yeah. Okay. It's not a sandwich from Philadelphia.
No.
Okay. All right. So we've got this some of this clothing that one might wear if they work in the bush. I think I'm saying that correctly. What about music? Is that something that is going to tell us a lot about the heart of this place?
Oh, there's so much. So obviously there's the African side of things. So there's a big music craze called Kwaito, which is a very Africanized music, like rap, but not quite. And then you have a lot of these different strains of African music around, but Kwaito is a big one. And then Afrikaans music, which is this probably the smallest population of South Africa in terms of demographics, and they sell more music in that industry than any other music, including from the States or the UK or internationally within South Africa. That is the main type of music that's sold, and it's very disco-y, poppy. It's crazy. It's a whole nother. You actually have to have a drink or two in order to listen to it, let alone enjoy it.
Okay, well, I definitely am going to be looking up some of those music styles because I love learning about different kinds of international music. I'm looking at the questions here, Richard, and we have a few questions about Swaziland.
Yes.
One of them is basically, can you tell us about Swaziland and Lesotho? Am I saying that correctly?
Lesotho.
Lesotho. Okay. So could you tell us about these two places and let's see what they would like to know. Why do they exist? And then are they inhabited mainly by indigenous people?
So I think the best way to explain it is these are two kingdoms. So there were two, there's the Swazi tribe, and Lesotho was another kingdom, and they decided not to be part of South Africa. There were a number of homelands that were created in South Africa during apartheid. Botswana, Transkei, Ciskei, these were all, Transkei and Ciskei were down around this area here, and Botswana was up top here, and these were homelands where African people were allowed to live. And Swaziland and Lesotho fell within that, and they became separate countries. They actually separated themselves and at independence stayed on their own as their own thing. Lesotho's in the highlands of South Africa, so it's in the Drakensberg mountain range, runs straight through it. So now it's very cold in winter. Now we had a huge cold front push through. There's snow all over the mountains in Lesotho, and we actually have a ski resort there that for the most part needs to make its own snow, but it gets cold enough to make it. And then Swaziland is in the low veld. So there's actually a plateau that runs along because of this mountain range. And this is all high veld up at the top. It's all at a higher altitude. Johannesburg sitting at, I'll tell you now, it's exactly 5,300 feet above sea level is where I am right now. We're down in these lowlands here, you're looking at about 800 to 900 feet dropping down to sea level. And my wife and I, when we worked in Kruger National Park at Sabi, we used to drive through Swaziland to get to where her folks live down in Durban. And going through the country, you actually drive through a huge game reserve. The highway, you're driving at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, and you're looking out for elephant, for impala, for different zebra, wildebeest that are all moving around in the area.
Wow. Have there been different rules regarding sort of like game management? I'm not even sure if that's quite the language you'd use, but are there different rules there? And as such, would you say there's more or less land set aside for, I guess, reserve might be the way you would say it?
I would say less, just based on the space and the populations within them. And there is land within them, but again, this is not fenced within Swaziland, and Lesotho's in a much higher area, so you don't have as much game that lives in those areas to really have reserves. There's great fishing up there, beautiful birds, you get a lot of vulture colonies. There's a place called Clarence right next door to it, just around here, which is an amazing place to visit. And they've got some game, but it's not in abundance like Kruger National Park or your more traditional safari areas.
So speaking of safari, I don't think you can understand Alaska if you don't have some awareness of fishing. Like, it's in our DNA as a place. The same would go probably for like bear viewing, that kind of thing. Like, it is just, you step off the plane and there's your photos of things to do, and bear viewing would be right up there, of course, with the top. Safari seems to be in the DNA of South Africa the way fishing is in the DNA of Alaska. Would you agree? And then tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I was indoctrinated into it. My passion arose for the bush, for nature, for wildlife, and for wanting to see big cats specifically. I love predators. When I was at a very young age, at like 5 or 6 years old, and we used to go on holidays. So twice a year we would go on safari. So it's an ingrained natural part of things. You would go away for a weekend, a long weekend for 3 or 4 nights, and then go to a reserve and then drive yourself around. I never had access to the more exclusive places like what we go to now with Sabi Sands, with NatHab. But the experience now is very different. So I want to play this video here because this will give you a great idea of how this all looks and what the experience is like if you've never been there. So this is a leopard walking right next to the vehicle. It took me 16 years of my life before I saw my first leopard. And I went on safari 2 to 3 times a year. Now I get to see them on a daily basis. It becomes a little bit crazy. Following lions, things are habituated in these areas. So you get incredible game viewing. Look how close those lions are to the vehicle. And these little cubs were walking right behind our vehicle. So you can get a very good feel as to how the experience would run.
They are absolutely beautiful. And I mean, I think that's a little bit like with bear viewing here. When you get close to them, you're just like, this goes against everything I've been taught as far as fight or flight, or, you know, get the heck out of that dangerous situation. But as you said, they're habituated. And so there you are next to these phenomenal predators. It's got to be just so very humbling to be that close to wilderness of that kind of stature, I guess.
Totally. I mean, we're not going to be on foot like you are with the bears, but here you can see we're following 4 male lions down the road. Massive male lions right behind them. They're not even paying attention to us. And it's often that point of contention where guests go, is it safe? You know, why are they not eating? Why are they not looking to eat me? And that's because they've got used to the vehicles, and it actually talks to how guides before me treated the animals. Because if you treat them with respect, they will show you amazing things. And by giving them the space they needed, they automatically got to it. So I'll tell you, I'm going to recount a story of a leopard. And I don't know if I have her in any of these pictures, but I'm going to find, this actually is her here. And she was called the little bush female. I'm sure this will get better. There we go. She was called the little bush camp female. So she hung around a camp called Little Bush Camp at Sabi Sabi, and she was a absolute terrorist. She used to charge us all the time. We'd walk guests back, and she'd be hiding underneath a little walkway, and then she'd come bolting up and come right up to you, like 6 feet from your feet, and it is horrifying. You want to die because that fear is crazy with regards to it. And around vehicles, she was never comfortable with a tracker sitting on the front seat, which is right out in the front. I'm going to go back again so that you can see this picture of where the tracker is sitting. So this is the tracker on the front here. And she hated them, and she used to charge these guys all the time. So what we did was we said, okay, normally we would allow 3 vehicles into a cat sighting. For her, we went down to 1 vehicle, and if she was cross, we would make it no vehicle and call it a negative location. Nobody was allowed to go there. And over 6 months of just giving her that space, she calmed down to the point that she was walking next to the vehicle as if we weren't even there.
Wow. You know, that leads me to quite a few questions that we're seeing from the viewers here, Richard. And there's several of them, so I'm going to kind of combine how they're being asked here.
Sure.
One of them has to do with the fencing around Kruger and how the animals sort of move from there. And I think they said Sabi Sabi.
Yep.
And then the kind of attached to that is this idea of when you went to the where was it that you went? When you went to the bush and you were didn't have as many people around since COVID, did you see a difference? Okay, there you go. Did you see a difference in how the animals interacted? You mentioned that you were worried you wouldn't find them, but did you see a difference in how they interacted? And maybe with that, you could speak a little bit to what you and I mean when we use the word habituated.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Annie. Both those questions are fantastic. So just remember that within the Sabi Sands is connected to the Kruger National Park. The western boundary of the Kruger National Park, and I'm just going to bump back to this map again. So the Kruger National Park runs down the side here and around like a boot that sits on the side here, just the boot of Italy the other way around. So the fence is only on the periphery. Animals are free to migrate backwards and forwards. For a long time in the Sabi Sands and in Sabi Game Reserve, in this area here, that was fenced. It was private reserves that then dropped their fences to create a bigger reserve. And then there was a smaller fence that stopped the buffalo moving backwards and forwards because they were worried about foot and mouth disease. So they then in 1994 decided that that fence was no longer necessary, dropped the fence and allowed migration of animals in and out of Kruger. So they move around the whole time. And where it gets spectacular is when you live and work in one area for a prolonged period, you get to know individual animals, their territories and how they work, as well as when new animals come in and see that interaction and how that changes over time. So habituation is really about getting animals used to having a big green animal in terms of a large safari vehicle in their space without them reacting. Animals have a comfort zone, which is, depending on how they feel around you, can be 300 meters away or 300 yards away that they're not there. Then you have an alert zone where they go, oh, somebody's coming into my area, then a warning zone, and so it goes, and these rings will change. And what we're changing with habituation is how far that comfort zone is. And it gets to the point where I've particularly had to give a tap on the door and give a bang on the door as leopard cubs were climbing up the runners of the vehicle. And you could see that the vehicle is an open vehicle. So if they come up the runner, they're looking into the vehicle. So you have to create that extra bit of distance between you and them so that that takes place. And then to the question of how they reacted now because we're gone, they actually, the lions specifically that I encountered, were a little bit more nervous of the vehicle because they hadn't seen as many vehicles and were less comfortable to them. So I had to give a greater comfort zone to them and allow them to come and become comfortable with me again, in me showing them that respect.
That's very similar to what we're doing with the bears here, that you've got to, basically you have to behave in a predictable manner so that they know what's going to happen or not happen. And as long as you're following those rules, then you can be incredibly close to an animal that you normally, wouldn't have access to. So we've got this incredible history of South Africa. We have all of these locations. We've got these animals that you've started to tell us about, these mammals. What about the birds is something that makes up or helps us understand the heart of this place? Sophia, last week when we were talking about Mexico, for me, I realized that smell is the thing that helps me sort of return back to a place immediately. For her, it was sound. She said when she hears something that reminds her of wherever, she's instantly back in that place. When I think of that, I think of the birds for sure. So tell us a little bit about the birds of your home.
Sure. I'm going to go to my senses first, because it's funny, under the lockdown, and we had a hard lockdown for a few months, and we're sort of back to that again as our rates are going up. But during that lockdown, somebody sent a video of a fire at dawn with the sounds of the dawn chorus and hyenas whooping in the background. And I literally sat in front of my phone, mesmerized by the sounds of that crackling of the fire and the dawn chorus going it instantly transported me back there. And the other part of it, and obviously the dawn chorus, is the birds, because you're just recognizing so many different bird calls. But the other part of it for me is smell, especially winter now. When I was back there now, opening up the door to walk out of your room in the morning, and that fresh winter smell of the bush comes in and just fills you up, is absolutely unreal. Absolutely unreal. So that's a massive part of the whole experience for me. In terms of birds, I'm going to talk to you about a vulture, because vultures have this much maligned thought process, and they're scavengers and horrible creatures. And this specific one was while we were on a NatHab trip, we were following wild dogs that run impala into the Sand River and caught one and were eating it next to our vehicle, and this vulture came in to do its business right next to us. And it was unreal. But vultures are crazy. This little guy can fill its crop in 5 minutes. They've got little barbs on their tongue, and what they do, because they're scavengers and bigger scavengers can chase him off, or lions or hyenas or anything like that, they have to eat as much as they can as fast as they can. That neck is long and thin and has very little feathering on it in order to not get blood and keep themselves clean. And they'll go in there and they will fill their crop with meat within 5 minutes, really, really fast. They also, the Cape Griffin vulture has the highest recorded flight, which was 40,000 feet, because it was hit by a Boeing 747. They picked up the feather out of the engine and were able to identify the bird from that. Now imagine it's minus 60 degrees centigrade up there. There must be next to zero oxygen, but these guys have incredible down feathers, an ability to do that and get high up to be able to get into jet streams and be able to travel huge distances. One of the longest recorded bird flights in Southern Africa was a Cape Griffin vulture that traveled over about 800 to 900 miles in 24 hours.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
I'm just get a charger. I'm listening to you.
Okay. Well, I was just going to mention that vultures in many cases are sort of the composters, if you will, or the gardeners of an ecosystem. They
Yes.
will end up kind of helping if you have animals that have been killed for some reason. They'll kind of end up cleaning them up. And that's certainly what we see with eagles here in Alaska, that they take care of that carrion.
Yes.
Is that something that you also see with vultures, that without them, the ecosystem would change greatly?
Well, it's even greater than just the cleanup crew. They are very much the cleanup crew. They are the first ones there, they're the last ones there, and go through the system. But where beyond cleaning up carrion, which needs to happen in order to keep disease away, and they also transmitters of disease. So anthrax is a naturally occurring disease that happens through Africa, and it happens mainly during times of drought, where the anthrax spores are kicked up by hippopotamus that are forced into smaller pools within rivers, and these then kick up deep sediments which release the anthrax spores. And the first ones to the dead animals are our vultures. And the vultures then go and feed on these animals and then move to water holes to clean themselves, because they are such clean animals after being in this really putrid spaces of eating. And they then spread the anthrax spores through these things. And everyone goes, but why anthrax? That's horrendous. Disease is terrible, but disease is necessary, because without that, the ecosystem is already under too much pressure in a drought status. So what nature is doing is effectively getting rid of the weak ones, leaving just the strong to use the limited resources that are left. And as that then starts to filter out and your rains come back, the anthrax spores get pushed back, the animals are able to fight it off because their condition is better, and that all settles again for a longer run. So this bird plays a massive role in ecosystem beyond just cleaning up dead meat.
Okay, so we've gotten to a little bit of history, a little bit of culture, some information on these animals. What else do you want to wrap up with here to say, wait, you can't leave South Africa without having some time to understand this.
So one of the beautiful parts about Africa and Southern Africa is the sunsets. You get these unreal colors that get forced out into the world and just create a completely different universe that you're looking at. Over water, over the bush, as we're waking up, this is at Mala Mala when we're waking up in the morning and leaving for game drive. There are some incredible, incredible sunsets. This was one of my favorites where there was a massive bushfire, which again is a natural part of this destruction and then new life. And there was smoke all over the place, and it created this blue light at the bottom and this beautiful red at the top, and this beautiful antelope, kudu antelope, was walking across in front of it. And then lastly, the other thing that we are so blessed with down here are stars. And I want to show you a couple of shots. So this was at a lodge called the Outpost that we used to use for our NatHab trips. One of the most beautiful views you could ever see in your life. And the Milky Way moving across over a period of about 2 hours. Then, this was a shot from Sabi Sabi, another time lapse of the stars moving. This one will take a little bit of buffering here.
Wow.
I'm just going to start that again so that it can roll a bit better. And then the other thing we get out here, which it can be terrifying to a lot of people, is storms, thunderstorms. We have the most, it's like World War III broke out. They are so intense. And this was one that happened over the Okavango Delta on one of my trips. And
wow.
It just is like these massive thundering clouds that just keep on going. But you get these beautiful shots of the stars. And this is one of my groups from 2 years ago that we enjoyed under the stars. So it's always a nice thing to be able to enjoy some time under the cosmos and contemplate your life and your place in the universe.
It's I keep thinking when I look at these photos of yours, Richard, that, you know, the definition of photography is like painting with light, and certainly you have achieved that here. It's absolutely stunning. Anything else before we leave? Anything else that I just must know about if I'm going to have been to South Africa?
You just have to come and try it. There's much that I can say about it, and we could probably go on for days just talking on this subject. But getting here and experiencing it firsthand is like nothing else in the world. The friendliness, the warmth, the experience, the close-up understanding of things. And what Safari does for me in South Africa is the guides are so nicely and well trained that it is not just about seeing things. And it always blows people's minds that when they get there, they suddenly stop at a tree and they're learning how they make a toothbrush out of this thing, or how this tree impacts. I'll give you a quick story before we wrap up here. But elephants, during January and February, the marula trees start to fruit. These fruits are incredible. And these guys will eat marula fruits up the yazoo. They will eat hundreds to thousands in a day. And because of the high vitamin C content, it actually has a negative effect on their bowels, and they start getting a bit of diarrhea, but that's okay. They self-medicate. They go to trees with very high tannins in order to slow their systems down, so they're able to mimic and medicate themselves in order to keep their equilibrium. That's the sort of information that you get out of a safari in South Africa that I just love, and I love giving when we're out there.
Wow. I cannot wait to go. I hope someday that I get to be there in South Africa with you, and you get to be here in Alaska with me. I think that would be a pretty good trade-off.
I'm there. There's a space for you, Annie. I'm waiting.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We do have a few questions. Actually, we have so many questions. There's no way that we could get to all of them, but I'm going to do a little bit of rapid fire on some of them, and I'll ask you to do the same.
Nope.
One, quite a few people have asked about the boot that I mentioned from New Zealand. It's a blundstone, I believe is how you say it. And it's
Okay.
a low boot, a little bit like the boot that you showed us, but it doesn't have laces. You pull it on from the back, and it's specifically sort of a work boot. I believe actually from, I know it's from New Zealand. So yeah, that's what I have on the boot. Second, we have a lot of questions about, tell us how many seasons are there in South Africa?
So there's basically summer and a winter. Our spring and autumn are so short and really not that noteworthy to bring them in. And most of the time, your summer is probably closer to about 7 to 8 months of the year, and then the coldest time is your period that we're going through now. So end of May, June, July, August can be cold. And then after that, I mean, in the bush, where I was now, it was 85 in the coldest time of the winter.
Okay. And then another question is, if you were going to, if I said to you, where should I go? What's the best advice for traveling to South Africa? I mean, I would typically say to someone, check out the NatHab itinerary, but is there anything sort of an insider's view that you'd like us to be aware of?
The NatHab trip is spectacular. We do a little bit of Botswana, we do a place called Mashatu, and then go down, I believe the trip's changing to a new reserve called Marataba, which I'm actually visiting in a few weeks, which I'm totally excited about getting out of quarantine for. And then we go to a place called Mala Mala. And if you were to do that trip, it is well worth sticking around and going down to Cape Town for at least 3 or 4 days and experiencing one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It really is a spectacular place to see. So that would be my advice, is to add Cape Town on. And if you have extra time, Vic Falls is cool, but Cape Town is a spectacular place to eat, drink, and be merry.
Fantastic. And if I'm going to go look up a recipe from some kind of South African food, so I can sort of try to see if I could get anywhere near a taste of South Africa, what recipe should I look up?
I would go for Boboti, B-O-B-O-T-I-E, Boboti. And it is a mix of cultures from Cape Malay through African through European that all got mixed up in the kitchens in Cape Town. And it is just like a curried mince, but that's not too hot. Oh, it's amazing. It's too much fun.
All right, I'm going to give it a shot, Richard. I'll let you know how I fare. We do have webinars coming up tomorrow and all of next week. I saw some questions on that. And in not next Thursday, but the following, you and I are going to meet again. And this time we'll be talking about the heart of Uganda and understanding this place, which I cannot wait, because I will tell you that that is on my bucket list. Of all the places I've had the privilege to go with NatHab, that is right up there. Richard, thank you so very much for joining us today. Thank you for bringing me to your home. It's only made me want to go even more than I did before. And especially thank you to all of you who have joined us today. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to tune in. Richard, do you want to say something before we sign off?
I just want to say thank you to you, Annie, for hosting it. Thank you to NatHab for hosting these amazing webinars. I've been having an absolute ball giving them. And thank you to all of you who take the time to listen in and be part of this whole experience with us. So keep safe, stay at home, and let's get through this and get traveling soon.
Great.
Sounds
thank you
great.
both.
So with that, I'll hand it to you.
Great. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have that replay on our website probably around this time tomorrow. And we do not have a webinar tomorrow for those of you asking. Our presenter had to guide in Yellowstone last minute, so he had to pull out. So we'll be off tomorrow, but we will be back on Monday. So everyone have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. And with that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye, guys. Thank you.